Sergeant Caden Williams was tired. After years of combat, long nights on foreign planets, and countless battles that felt more like survival than victory, he was beginning to wonder if there was any end to it. The war with the alien factions had taken a toll on everyone, and Caden, a battle-hardened soldier from Earth, was no exception. His body ached, his mind was worn out, and there was a feeling inside him that he could never shake, an emptiness that no victory seemed to fill. But this day was different. This day, he received an unexpected message from his commanding officer. Sergeant Williams reported to the briefing room immediately. The voice of General Davenport crackled through his earpiece. There was no explanation, no preamble, just the command. Caden sighed, adjusting his armor as he made his way to the briefing room. He had been in the military long enough to know when something wasn't right, and the suddenness of this order was enough to put him on edge. As he entered the briefing room, he saw several high-ranking officers standing around a large table. General Davenport was at the center, his face hard to read. He gestured for Caden to take a seat. "Caden, it's good to see you," the general said, his voice low. "You've done well. Very well. Your service has been invaluable, and the higher-ups want to reward you." Caden raised an eyebrow. "A reward?" He wasn't sure what kind of reward could come after years of grueling war. He had never been one to seek accolades. What could possibly make all the pain and sacrifice worthwhile? "Sir," Caden said, "I've seen a lot of battles, but if this is about giving me a medal, you can forget it." The general chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. "No, Caden, it's not a medal," Davenport said, his voice steady. "It's something else. You've earned it, but it's complicated." The room fell into a heavy silence as General Davenport hit a button on the control panel in front of him. The screens on the walls flickered to life, showing a hologram of a small alien woman. Caden blinked, leaning forward to get a better look. She was tiny, barely reaching the height of a human child. Her skin was a smooth shade of teal, and her long flowing hair shimmered with iridescent hues. She was dressed in a form-fitting, sleek outfit that seemed to glow softly, almost as if she was made of light itself. Her eyes, large and bright, looked straight through the hologram as though she was staring directly at him. "This is Liara," the general continued, his tone more serious now. "She is a member of the Venar species, a peaceful, intelligent race. You've heard of them before?" Caden nodded slowly. He had heard rumors about the Venar. The stories painted them as small and delicate, yet incredibly advanced. They had been allies in the war against the other alien factions, but very little was known about their internal politics or their way of life. "Liara is not just any Venar," the general said. "She is a diplomat, sent by her people to form a bond with Earth. As part of your reward for your service, you've been chosen to assist her." Caden frowned, not understanding what the general meant by assist. He had been expecting a reward that involved something tangible, credits, a promotion, maybe a break from the front lines. But this was something else entirely. "Assist her with what?" Caden asked, his voice cautious. The general exchanged a quick look with the officers standing around the table before speaking again. The Venar believe that personal bonds between individuals of different species can strengthen alliances. They want to create a human Venar bond that will help solidify our cooperation in the war, he explained. And they've chosen you to be part of this experiment. You will act as her companion, her partner, as a way of demonstrating the strength of the human-Venar relationship. Caden's eyes widened in disbelief. "You want me to what?" he asked, incredulous. The general nodded. "You'll spend time with Liara, learn from her, and assist her in whatever way she needs. It's not just for her benefit. This bond could help us secure more powerful alliances. It's a gesture of trust and respect between our species. You're a soldier, Caden. You understand how important this is. Your actions could shape the future of Earth's position in the galaxy." Caden sat back in his chair, trying to process the information. He had fought in countless battles, but this was a new kind of war, a war of diplomacy and connection. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about politics. There was something else to it, something more personal. But why him? Why was he the one chosen for this? He had been trained to fight, to command, not to form alliances with tiny aliens. He had no idea how to bond with someone like Liara, especially when their cultures were so different. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this," Caden said, his voice quieter now. The general looked at him with an understanding that Caden hadn't expected. "I know this isn't what you signed up for," he said, "but the Vaynar have chosen you because they believe in your strength and integrity. You'll be helping both of our peoples. If anyone can make this work, it's you, Sergeant." Caden felt a strange mixture of pride and discomfort. He had always done what was required of him in battle. But this felt like stepping into a world he didn't understand. He couldn't help but wonder what would happen next, and what kind of bond he would form with Liara. The general's voice cut through his thoughts. "You leave for the Vaynar capital tomorrow," he said. "Be ready." As Caden left the briefing room, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. What would it be like to live alongside someone so different? What was the point of this strange partnership? And most of all, what kind of reward was this really? The journey ahead seemed uncertain, but Caden knew one thing for sure. His next mission wasn't going to be anything like the ones he had faced before. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Caden found himself becoming more comfortable with Liara. The Vaynar capital, with its shining silver buildings and peaceful gardens, had started to feel more like a home than a foreign land. He was no longer a soldier on a mission. He was a guest in a world that had shown him more kindness and understanding than he ever expected. But despite the growing bond between him and Liara, something felt off. There was an undercurrent of tension in the air, a quiet unease that Caden couldn't ignore. He had been told that his role here was to help strengthen the alliance between Earth and the Vaynar, to be a symbol of unity. But what if that was all it was? A symbol. He had spent so much time focusing on the differences between their cultures, their physical appearance, their values, their way of life, that he had forgotten to ask himself why this had to be him. Why had the Vaynar chosen him for this task? Why not someone else? Someone who had more experience with diplomacy. Someone who understood peace the way they did. Caden didn't realize he had been staring out the window of the embassy until Liara's voice broke through his thoughts. "Sergeant Williams, you are deep in thought again," she said softly, her voice a gentle reminder that they had been walking together through the garden for some time now. Caden turned to her, offering a faint smile. "Just thinking, Liara, about the future." Liara looked at him, her gaze steady and knowing. She had always been able to read him, even when he didn't say a word. "The future is uncertain for all of us," she said, her tone thoughtful. "But it is ours to shape, as I've said before." Caden nodded, but his mind was far from the peaceful garden around them. There were rumors, whispers that he had overheard during the quiet evenings in the embassy, that things were not as simple as they seemed. There were factions within the Vaynar government that didn't trust Earth. They didn't trust Caden either. He had heard enough in passing to know that his presence here might not be as innocent as he thought. "I've been hearing things," Caden admitted, lowering his voice as they continued walking. "Whispers. There are people who don't want Earth and the Vaynar to get too close. People who don't want this alliance to work, and I'm starting to wonder if I'm just a pawn in someone else's game." Liara stopped in her tracks, her small frame turning toward him with an intensity he wasn't used to seeing from her. "A pawn?" she repeated, her voice a mixture of surprise and concern. "You are not a pawn, Sergeant. You are much more than that." Caden met her gaze, feeling a wave of frustration rise inside him. "I'm not so sure. I'm starting to think they chose me because I'm expendable. A soldier, someone who won't ask too many questions, someone who won't rock the boat." Liara's expression softened and she stepped closer to him. "You are wrong," she said firmly. "The Vaynar chose you because you are strong, not because you are weak. They chose you because you carry the weight of experience, of battle, of survival. But more than that, they chose you because of your heart." Caden didn't say anything at first. He wasn't sure how to respond. It felt strange hearing such praise from Liara. After all, she was the diplomat, the one who knew how to navigate the delicate balance of peace. He was just a soldier, a man used to doing things the hard way, the way that involved action rather than words. "I don't feel like I'm anything special," he finally said, his voice low. "I'm just a soldier. I do what I'm told. And sometimes it feels like that's all I'll ever be." Liara's eyes softened and she placed a small hand on his arm. "You are more than that, Caden. You've seen things that would break most people. You've fought in wars, lost comrades, and still you stand here. That makes you stronger than you know. The Vaynar did not choose you for your past. They chose you because they believe you have the power to build something new, something lasting." Caden felt a lump form in his throat. He wasn't sure if he could accept what she was saying, but there was a part of him that wanted to believe her. He had spent so much of his life fighting and surviving, but he had never really thought about what it meant to build something, to create something from the ground up. Could he really do that? Could he change? He looked down at Liara, her eyes reflecting a wisdom that went beyond her years. There was so much more to her than met the eye, more than just the tiny, delicate appearance she presented. She was a warrior, a diplomat, and a survivor in her own right. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly, his voice uncertain. "Maybe I'm here for more than just a mission, but it still feels like I'm in over my head. I don't know how to do this, Liara. I don't know how to be what they want me to be." Liara smiled, her expression warm and understanding. "You don't have to be perfect, Caden. You don't have to have all the answers. None of us do, but we have to try. And that is enough." Caden took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He had always been the one who followed orders, the one who was expected to have the solution in the middle of the chaos. But this was different. This wasn't a battle he could fight with force. This was a battle for trust, for understanding. It was a battle for peace, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for that. But as he stood there with Liara, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe he wasn't just a soldier anymore. Maybe he could be more than that. Maybe, just maybe, he could help build something that lasted longer than the wars he had fought. As they continued their walk through the garden, Caden knew one thing for sure. This mission, this strange partnership with Liara, was just the beginning. And no matter how uncertain the future seemed, he was going to do his best to shape it into something worth fighting for. The journey to the Vaynar capital was long, filled with the usual discomfort of interstellar travel. Caden sat in the sterile, quiet ship, the hum of the engines vibrating through the walls, keeping him company in the solitude. He stared out, the viewport, watching the stars stretch and blur as they sped through the galaxy. His mind wandered as his body rested against the cold metallic seat. The mission still didn't feel real. He had expected a reward that felt more, well, rewarding. What kind of person would he even be around this alien diplomat? What would he say to her? She was smaller than most children, and while her alien beauty was mesmerizing, Caden couldn't imagine what he had in common with someone like her. His thoughts were interrupted by the ship's intercom buzzing. "Sergeant Williams will be arriving at the Vaynar capital in 30 minutes. Please prepare yourself," came the calm voice of the ship's AI. Caden sighed and straightened up, preparing for whatever awaited him. He had no choice but to play along, even though he wasn't sure what the goal of this assignment was. The general had been vague on the details, and Caden didn't feel like pressing for more information. He had done his duty, and this was just another task. The ship finally began to slow as they entered the orbit of the Vaynar planet. Through the viewport, Caden saw the sprawling city of silver and glass, towering over the landscape like something out of a dream. The Vaynar capital was breathtaking, with its sleek buildings and streets that shimmered under the soft light of distant suns. As the ship touched down, Caden's heart rate picked up. He hadn't expected the capital to look so beautiful. The entire city had a sense of calm and quiet strength, the kind of place where people would think before acting, a stark contrast to the war-torn planets he had visited. The ship's doors hissed open and Caden stepped out into the docking bay. He was greeted by an escort of Venar soldiers, their movements graceful and precise. They were taller than the woman in the hologram, but still much smaller than him. Despite their size, there was an undeniable aura of power around them. One of the soldiers, a female with dark blue skin and silver markings running down her arms, stepped forward. She had an air of authority about her, and her eyes held a curiosity as they scanned Caden. "You are Sergeant Williams," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, though the slight accent made it hard to understand at times. "Welcome to Venar. I will take you to Liara now." Caden nodded, following her through the elegant corridors of the capital. The city was alive with energy, but there was an odd sense of serenity. People moved about calmly, and there were no sounds of war or machinery. Clanging in the distance, it was peaceful. He had never been to a planet so tranquil before, and it made him uncomfortable in a way he didn't expect. After a short walk, they arrived at a large, open chamber. At its center stood Liara. She was even more striking in person than in the hologram. Her long, flowing hair shimmered like liquid silver, and her eyes, those eyes, seemed to look straight through Caden, deep into his very soul. She was small, barely reaching his knee, but she held herself with a grace that commanded respect. She wore a simple but elegant outfit that shimmered faintly in the light, the colors shifting as she moved. Caden took a step forward, unsure of what to say. Her gaze met his, and for a moment they just stared at each other. There was something in her eyes, something both intelligent and guarded, that made Caden feel like he had to tread carefully. "Sergeant Williams," she said, softly, her voice surprisingly firm for someone so small. "It is a pleasure to meet you." Caden cleared his throat and nodded, unsure how to respond. Likewise, Liara. I didn't expect, well, this. I mean, you're not what I imagined." Liara raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement, flashing in her eyes. "I suppose you were expecting something grander?" Caden shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know. Maybe something a bit more military. But I guess I'm used to war, not peace." "War can be tiring, Sergeant," Liara replied, stepping closer. Her voice was calm, measured. "The Venar have lived through their own struggles, but now we seek a different path, one that doesn't involve endless conflict." Caden watched as she moved around him, her tiny frame easily darting between the various objects in the room. Her movements were fluid, like water flowing around rocks. It was clear that Liara was more than just an envoy. There was something deep inside her, a strength that Caden hadn't expected to find in someone so small. "So what now?" Caden asked, his voice low. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" Liara stopped and turned to face him, a serious expression on her face. "We'll begin by understanding each other. You must learn about my people and our ways, and in return, I will learn about yours. This bond, our partnership, will serve as a symbol of unity between Earth and the Venar. You are not just a soldier, Sergeant, you are a bridge." Caden frowned. "A bridge? I don't know how much of a bridge I can be. I'm just a soldier. I fight, I follow orders. I don't know anything about diplomacy." Liara smiled, but it wasn't an amused smile. It was the smile of someone who had seen much more than their fair share of battles. "You underestimate yourself. The Venar chose you for this because of your heart, your strength, not just your skills with a weapon." Caden stood still, uncertain. He was a soldier. That was what he had always been, and that was what he was good at. But here, on this peaceful planet, he wasn't sure how to be anything else. He had never been asked to bridge gaps between cultures, to build relationships with someone so different from him. Liara's eyes softened as she looked up at him. "You are capable of more than you realize, Sergeant. I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to open your mind, to see the possibility of something different." Caden looked down at her, his thoughts racing. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. Something about Liara's presence made him want to understand her, to understand her people. But there was also the fear of the unknown, the fear that he would fail. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this. But in the quiet of the room, with Liara standing before him, there was something he couldn't ignore. A connection, however small, that began to form between them. Caden followed the Vaynar soldier down the narrow, dimly lit hallway, Liara close behind him. His heart was pounding, his senses alert. He had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and they were telling him that this wasn't just another diplomatic misunderstanding. Something was happening, something that could shake the fragile alliance between Earth and the Vaynar. The soldier led them to a hidden room near the back of the embassy, its door slightly ajar. Inside, Caden could hear muffled voices. He motioned for Liara to stay back, stepping cautiously inside the room, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. The room was filled with Vaynar officials. Some Caden recognized, others he didn't. They were gathered around a large holographic display, their faces grim and serious. As Caden stepped further into the room, the conversation abruptly stopped, and all eyes turned toward him. "Sergeant Williams," one of the officials said, his voice cold. "We were expecting you." Caden's eyes scanned the room, his instincts on high alert. He could sense that something wasn't right. These weren't the same people who had welcomed him with open arms when he first arrived. These were the ones who didn't want the Alliance to succeed, the ones who feared Earth's influence. "What's going on here?" Caden demanded, his voice sharp. "I'm not in the mood for games." The official, a tall Vaynar with dark, green skin and silver tattoos running down his neck, stepped forward. "There are factions within the Vaynar government that oppose this alliance. They believe that Earth's influence will corrupt our way of life. They have been planning to take action against your people, and now we are too late. They've already made their move." Caden's heart sank. He exchanged a quick glance with Liara, who stood at the door, her expression unreadable. "You're saying there's a group trying to sabotage the alliance?" Caden asked, his voice low. The official nodded. "Yes. They've begun to rally support, and if we don't act fast, they'll tear apart everything we've worked for. Your presence here, Sergeant, is part of the plan to stop them. But it's not just your military strength that's needed. You must use your influence to unite those who still believe in peace." Caden's mind raced. He had never been trained for this kind of battle, one of politics of words, not weapons. But he knew what he had to do. If the Vaynar were truly on the brink of civil war, the fragile peace between their species and with Earth could be lost forever. "How do we stop them?" Caden asked, his voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling inside him. Liara stepped forward, her gaze determined. "We must confront those who oppose the alliance. We must show them that the strength of our people lies in unity, not division. We need to bring those who still support the peace together." Caden nodded, understanding what she was asking. It was more than just a mission now. It was about everything they had worked for, everything they had fought for. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a mediator, a symbol of unity in the face of a growing threat. The official who had spoken earlier turned to Caden, his eyes wary. "There is a meeting scheduled tomorrow with the key leaders of both factions. If we cannot sway them, we risk losing everything. It is a delicate situation, Sergeant. One wrong move, and the entire alliance could fall apart." Caden felt the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had no idea how to handle this, how to talk to people who were so deeply entrenched in their beliefs. But one thing was clear. He couldn't do this alone. He turned to Liara, his voice low but determined. "We'll do it together. I trust you." She nodded, her expression softening. "And I trust you, Caden. Together we can make a difference." The next day, Caden and Liara stood before a group of Vaynar leaders, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. The leaders of the factions who opposed the alliance were present, their faces hard with skepticism and distrust. Caden could feel their eyes on him, sizing him up, judging him. This wasn't just about the future of Earth and the Vaynar anymore. This was about his own reputation, his own ability to stand tall in the face of adversity. Liara stood beside him, her posture regal, her eyes calm but resolute. She spoke first, her voice carrying authority. We are at a crossroads. The decisions we make here will determine the future of our people, of both the Venar and Earth. We have worked too hard to build this alliance to let fear tear it apart. We must unite, not divide. The leaders exchanged glances, murmurs passing between them. Caden could feel their resistance, their hesitation, but Liara's words had planted a seed of doubt in their minds. They knew the importance of what she was saying, even if they didn't want to admit it. Caden stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I've been a soldier my whole life, he said, his eyes scanning the room. I've seen the cost of war, the destruction it leaves behind. I've lost comrades, I've lost friends, and I've seen what happens when two sides can't find a way to come together. He paused, letting his words sink in. The room was silent now, all eyes on him. Peace isn't easy, Caden continued, but it's worth fighting for. It's worth dying for. I've seen firsthand how much pain the war has caused, and I've seen the hope that comes with the possibility of peace. The alliance between Earth and the Venar is our chance to build something better, something that lasts. There was a long silence as Caden finished speaking. The leaders didn't immediately respond, but Caden could see the subtle shift in their expressions. They were listening now. They were hearing him. Finally, one of the leaders, an older Venar woman with silver markings along her arms, stood up. She looked at Caden with a mixture of respect and skepticism. Perhaps you are right, Sergeant, she said slowly. But peace requires trust, and trust cannot be built in a day. Liara nodded. Trust is a journey, not a destination. But it begins with a single step. The room was still, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. Then one by one the leaders began to speak, their voices more measured, more thoughtful. They weren't all convinced, but Caden could see the change in their eyes. They were no longer dismissing him as an outsider. They were listening, truly listening. As the meeting came to an end, Caden felt a strange sense of relief. They hadn't won the war. There was still much to be done. But for the first time, he felt like they had taken a step toward peace. A real step, not just a symbol. As he and Liara walked out of the room together, Caden looked at her, his heart full of gratitude. We did it, he said, his voice quiet. Liara smiled up at him, her eyes shining with pride. Not yet, but we're getting closer. And for the first time since arriving on the Venar planet, Caden believed her. The weeks passed quickly, and Caden's role in the Venar capital became clearer with every day. His connection with Liara grew stronger, and despite the discomfort he had felt at first, he found himself becoming more comfortable in her world. He had learned more than he had ever expected, not just about the Venar and their peaceful ways, but about himself. The lessons were subtle, woven into every conversation, every quiet moment spent with Liara. She was teaching him not just how to adapt to peace, but how to find it within himself. Yet despite the growing bond between them, Caden couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The whispers he had overheard had become more frequent, and now there were murmurs of unrest among the Venar leaders. Caden had tried to ignore them, thinking they were just rumors. But the more time he spent with Liara, the more he realized that there was a tension in the air that couldn't be ignored. One evening, as they sat in the peaceful garden of the embassy, Caden couldn't keep the questions from bubbling to the surface any longer. Liara, he said, his voice quiet but serious. There's something I need to know. The rumors. I've been hearing things about factions within the Venar government. Some people don't want this alliance between Earth and the Venar. They don't want me here. I need to know if there's any truth to it. Liara looked at him with a steady gaze, her eyes betraying no hint of surprise. She had known this conversation was coming. Still, her expression softened, and she took a deep breath before speaking. I'm not surprised that you've heard the rumors, she said. There are always those who resist change, Caden. There are factions within my people who are cautious about the alliance with Earth. Some fear that your people's way of life is too different, that it might destabilize our peaceful existence. Others are more concerned with the balance of power within the galaxy. They do not trust your military influence. Caden's heart sank. He had feared this. So I was right. They see me as a threat, not just to them, but to everything we've worked for. Liara shook her head. It is not you, Sergeant. It is the idea of what your presence represents. Your people are warriors, and while we respect that strength, it is also something that scares us. My people have spent generations working for peace, for stability. The idea of war, of violence, is something we try to avoid at all costs. We fear that your presence here could tip the balance we've worked so hard to maintain. Caden swallowed hard. He understood what she was saying. The Venar had lived through their own battles, their own struggles. Their way of life was precious to them, and they had fought to protect it. But what if their fears were justified? What if the alliance between Earth and the Venar was doomed from the start? I didn't sign up for this, Caden said, his voice strained. I was just a soldier doing my job. But now it feels like I'm in the middle of something I don't fully understand. This isn't just about us anymore, is it? Liara's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. Her touch light but comforting. You are in the middle of something important, Caden. You are not just a soldier anymore. You are a symbol of what can be achieved when two different peoples come together. I know it is difficult for you to understand, but your presence here is not a mistake. It is a choice, one that could change the future. Caden sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't feel like a symbol. I feel like a pawn in a game I don't understand. Liara's eyes flashed with something fierce. Determination, maybe, or something else entirely. You are not a pawn, Caden. You are a person. You have the power to shape the future just as much as I do. You have the power to change hearts, to build trust. But it won't be easy. Caden looked at her, uncertainty clouding his expression. He had never been good with diplomacy, never been the type of person to talk things out. He had always fought battles with his fists, not his words. But here, with Liara, he was being asked to do something completely different, to fight for peace instead of victory, to fight for understanding instead of survival. I don't know if I can do this, Caden admitted, his voice low. I'm not a diplomat. I don't know how to build bridges between two worlds. All I know is how to fight. Liara smiled gently, her hand still resting on his arm. You have more than just the strength to fight, Caden. You have the strength to listen, to understand. You've seen more of the galaxy than most, and you've learned from your experiences. You're not as helpless as you think. Caden felt a flicker of hope rise within him. Maybe she was right. Maybe he did have something more to offer than just his skills in combat. But even as the thought took root, the doubts returned. What if it wasn't enough? What if the Alliance couldn't be saved no matter how hard they tried? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise, a rustling in the bushes nearby. Both Caden and Liara turned, instinctively reaching for their weapons, but then a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. It was one of the Venar soldiers, their tall, lithe figures silhouetted against the moonlight. Sergeant Williams, the soldier said, bowing slightly. I am sorry to interrupt, but there is something you must see. Caden exchanged a quick glance with Liara. Something about the soldier's tone felt off. He nodded, signaling for Liara to follow him as he stood. What is it? Caden asked, his voice tense. The soldier's expression was serious. It is about the factions, Sergeant. There are movements in the capital, groups who want to push back against the Alliance. They have taken action. Caden felt a cold chill run down his spine. This was it. The tension he had been sensing for weeks was finally coming to a head. Liara's face hardened, her eyes narrowing with concern. Lead the way, Caden said, his voice firm, his soldier's instincts kicking in. As they followed the soldier through the darkened halls of the embassy, Caden realized that the peaceful life he had begun to build here was about to be shattered. The true test of the Alliance was about to begin, and he wasn't sure if they would survive it. Over the next few days, Caden and Liara spent most of their time together. The Vaynar capital was a far cry from the war-torn planets Caden had become accustomed to. Everything was pristine, calm, and efficient. The air smelled different here, fresh, almost sweet. And the buildings gleamed under the soft light of the twin moons. The silence in the streets was unsettling, but not in a bad way. It was as if everything here was in perfect balance. It made Caden feel out of place, like a loud noise in a symphony of silence. Liara was patient with him as he adjusted to the quiet, though she seemed to be perfectly at home. She had a way of moving through the world with grace, her every step fluid and sure, as if she belonged here. Caden, on the other hand, still felt like a stranger in a foreign land. He had been trained for war, for chaos, not for peace. But Liara was helping him, little by little, to see things from her perspective. "Come, Sergeant," Liara said one morning as she led him through a garden filled with glowing flowers. "This is where we keep the memory trees. They are sacred to my people." Caden followed her through the lush greenery, his boots making a soft sound on the ground. The garden was beautiful, filled with flowers that changed color depending on the light. The trees, however, were what caught his attention. They were unlike anything he had seen before. Tall, slender, and with leaves that seemed to pulse with light. It was as if they were alive in a way that no tree on earth could be. "Memory trees?" Caden asked, his curiosity piqued. Liara nodded. "Yes. They are linked to the memories of my people. Each tree holds the collective knowledge and experiences of those who have passed. When we plant a tree, we give it our memories. When it grows, it shares those memories with us." Caden watched as she reached out to touch one of the trees. The soft light around her fingers seemed to hum as she made contact. He felt a strange sense of reverence in the air, as if this place was sacred in a way he couldn't fully understand. "They share memories?" Caden repeated, still trying to wrap his head around the idea. Liara smiled. "Yes. Through touch, we can recall moments from our past, our ancestors' victories, our people's struggles, and the lessons learned over millennia. The trees help us remember where we came from and guide us in the present." Caden was quiet for a moment, reflecting on her words. Back on Earth, people had no such things. No ancient trees that could bring back memories or keep them alive. He couldn't imagine a world where memories were shared like that. Everything on Earth seemed more disconnected, more fleeting. But here in the Vaynar capital, it was as if time itself had a way of lingering, of making sure the past was never forgotten. "Are these trees your people's way of dealing with loss?" Caden asked softly, his voice low as if the moment demanded respect. Liara glanced at him, her eyes thoughtful. "Yes, in a way. We cannot escape loss, Sergeant. It is a part of life, no matter where we come from. But we can learn from it. These trees help us remember the good, the bad, and everything in between." Caden nodded, understanding the deeper meaning of her words. He had lost people in the war, and the memories of those losses had haunted him. But on Earth there was no sacred tree to remember them by, no gentle way to hold on to the lessons of the past. The war had taken that from him, and all he had left were the scars, both physical and emotional. "I guess we're not so different after all," Caden muttered, mostly to himself. "Loss hurts no matter where you're from." Liara turned to him, her gaze soft. "No, we are not so different, Sergeant. You carry your pain in a different way, but we all carry it." The silence between them was comfortable now, a quiet, understanding settling in the space. Caden felt as if something had shifted inside him. He hadn't expected to find common ground with Liara, of all people, but somehow he had. Over the following days, Caden began to feel less like a soldier in an alien world and more like someone who belonged here, if only for a short time. He spent hours with Liara, learning about the Vaynar culture, their values, and their history. They had a rich tradition of art, music, and philosophy that Caden found fascinating. Everything here was built on harmony, something that seemed almost impossible to him after everything he had witnessed in the war. At the same time, Liara was learning about him. She asked him about his life on Earth, about the wars he had fought, the hardships he had endured. Caden found it difficult to talk about. His experiences on the battlefield had left scars that words couldn't fully express. But Liara listened, patiently, never interrupting. Her large eyes focused on him with a quiet intensity. One evening, as they sat in the peaceful courtyard of the Vaynar embassy, Liara spoke of her own past. "I was not always a diplomat," she said, her voice soft in the fading light of the day. "I was trained as a warrior like many of my people, but I chose a different path. I believe in peace, Sergeant. I believe in finding solutions without violence." Caden turned his head to look at her, surprised. "A warrior? You? But you're so small." Liara chuckled softly. "Size does not dictate strength, Sergeant. My people are small in stature, but we are strong in our minds, in our spirits. We fight when we must, but we always seek a way to avoid it. That is the way of the Vaynar." Caden wasn't sure what to say to that. It sounded noble, but he knew the reality of war. Peace was easy to talk about, but harder to achieve. He had seen it firsthand, how quickly things could escalate, how one spark could turn everything to ash. "So, what's it like?" he asked after a long pause. "Living a life of peace, I mean. Can you really go through life without fighting?" Liara looked up at the sky, her gaze distant. "We don't avoid conflict, Sergeant. We simply try to resolve it without bloodshed. It is not always easy, but it is possible. The war you fought, it may be difficult to understand, but it does not have to be the way things always are." Caden felt a pang of guilt. Liara was right in a way. There was always a choice, even if that choice was hard to see. But it was hard to imagine a life without the war, especially when it had been all he had known. "Maybe one day we'll see things the same way," Caden said quietly, unsure of what he truly meant. Liara smiled, her eyes kind and understanding. "Perhaps. The future is always uncertain, but it is ours to shape, Sergeant."